Welcome to the Golf Improvement Podcast, episode 58.
Welcome to the podcast for golf lovers and enthusiasts who are looking to take their games to new heights. Dedicated to custom club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice to improve your golf game. This is the Golf Improvement Podcast with your host, Tony Wright.
Hello, this is Tony Wright from Game Improvement Golf in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, with the Golf Improvement Podcast, dedicated to bringing you useful information on custom club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice techniques to take your game to new heights. Hello there. Well, today I'm bringing you a little bit different type of an interview. A bit more free form than I typically do, and I think Dave actually turned the tables a little bit on me in terms of actually interviewing me during part of the podcast. That was unplanned, but it was really a lot of fun, and I think it turned out well. I love talking with Dave Hohnke, a master club fitter and the assistant golf coach at Indiana University. He's helped me learn a lot of very interesting things about wedge fitting and wedge play over the last month or so, and that's the topic for today. I've known Dave as long as I've been interested in custom club fitting. One of the first two people that I met when I went to the PCS convention, I think in 2006. And Dave is actually going to room with me at the Association of Golf Club Fitting Professionals Roundtable number 11 this November. So enjoy this interview with Dave Hohnke talking about wedges, wedge play, and wedge shafts. I think there's some things you'll learn that you perhaps didn't know that can help you play your best. Well, hello, this is Tony Wright with the Golf Improvement Podcast, and we're going to have a lot of fun today. I'm talking with Dave Hohnke. And you know, I talked to you a little bit before on an earlier podcast, but Dave was one of the very first people I met when I got interested in club fitting. He's the assistant coach at Indiana University. He's a master club fitter. He's actually going to work his butt off at the 11th annual AGCP roundtable because I think he's going to talk for about 6 or 8 hours on one of the days about a lot of topics, and one of them may be our topic for today, which is wedges and wedge shafts and wedge fitting. So, Dave, thanks for doing this today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, Tony. It's always fun to talk to you and good to hear from you.
Yeah, well, I think some people will hear some things maybe they're not aware of, but, you know, I'm going to start it out a little different today. You know, I guess about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I put a thing on our internal forum about wedge shafts and what are called spinner shafts, and you had suggested a couple things I hadn't thought about for a while. So I rebuilt all my wedges. My pitching gap 54 and 58, all the same head weight, all the same MOI. This is not Sterling irons. This is a little different, but all the same MOI. And instead of using wedge shafts, I used 8-iron shafts. And boy, do I love the feel of them so far. Yeah, taper tip shafts. Okay.
So Tony, one of the things that I really like about what you did, and we had briefly chatted about it on the internet, but you took all of your clubs and basically put all of your wedges into a similar moment of inertia.
Right.
You put all of them into a similar length, and you basically put all of your wedges or all of your scoring shots into a single swing. So how did that work?
I think so far it's going real well. I like the feel and the responsiveness, you know, the clubs around the green. I don't usually use my pitching wedge for, you know, kind of pitches or chips, but I use like my 49 and 54 and 58. They all set up the same, you know, and so the results, you know, I've only played, I think, I practiced once and played once since I did this, but I like it so far, and I can sense that consistency is going to help, you know. But also, I like the feel of the ball coming off the face. I like the way the ball just seems to check up a little bit more on like 20 or 30-yard shots than it did in the past. And So far, so good.
Okay, so what we're saying has happened here is you've kind of made a change. You made your wedges all the same length. They don't vary. So you've got your moment of inertia all exactly the same. Now you're telling me that you have increased feel, and you have a little bit more control about what the ball is doing on the green when you have those approach shots. So tell me, if you can, a little bit more about what's happening with those approach shots and how they work better, how they work differently, and tell me a little bit more about what you're feeling in your swing.
So you're interviewing me today, huh? That's good.
That's it, Tony. Yep.
You didn't think
we're going backwards here.
We're
That's
turning this
okay.
around. No, and it's good. I think we get accomplished what we want. I just feel the club face more, I believe, with the shorter shots. I would say that the first time I hit the pitching wedge, hit a full shot, I kind of stepped back and said, I'm amazed that the ball just seemed to jump off the face, and it's a little contrary to some things we might believe, because the flexes of the clubs are not the same as the rest of my clubs, but the ball was a little bit more responsive. I can hit a 9-iron, 135, 140 sometimes. And I was usually playing my pitching.
Back,
that's been 67-year-old guy once in a while can do it. But it just almost seemed in a way to sort of be a little more responsive off the face, even on longer shots. So, but what I'm really excited at some point is kind of dialing in sort of half shots, and the them being all the same length again, on using the same swing, using the same feel, should, I think, ultimately help me get a little better on, like 60, 70, 80-yard shots, right?
I think that's it. I think what we're going to see is that we're seeing much better activity for you, especially in your shot making in distance, and it'll probably bring in some better shot dispersion. Yeah.
Well, we're going to find out. But now I'm going to turn it back around a little bit, you son of a gun. But, so doing this was me being responsive to learn a little bit from you. And tell me a little bit kind of, sort of your history of kind of learning about what you think about wedge play. Sort of where did you start? But I know you talked about some influences you had with, Terry, I guess. Terry Kaler.
Well,
things like
Kaler
that has been one
Terry
of the big
Kaler and I had a wonderful experience, probably 2007, where we probably had a golf course superintendent who wanted to kill us both, because we put about 3,000 golf balls in a single day onto a single green, teaching wedge shots.
Now, and let me
make different shots.
And let me interrupt for those of you who don't know who Terry is. Terry was the developer of what originally was called Eidolon Wedges, which was a very good wedge company. But he is now also the big guy at Ben Hogan Golf. Okay, but Terry's been around for quite a long time. But we a number of us fitters have talked to him from time to time about things. But you got the full Monty treatment about wedge play with him, I guess, right?
Yes, and I think Terry and I have probably a really great relationship. Not only did he do Eidolon, he also did a product called Score, which was the
that's right. I forgot that was the next one.
The Ben Hogan product right now that is probably the most versatile fitting program in the world. But Terry and I worked a long time and with a lot of players talking about the concept of being able to make your swing so consistent that your hands always come back to the exact same place at impact. And when it comes to scoring, that's exactly what you want to do. You want to have your hands come back to the same place. Now, when we think in terms of a golf club design to have your hands come back to that same place, we have to start thinking about having all of those clubs be the exact same length and the exact same kind of feel. So our hands will just naturally come back to where they need to be. Does that kind of make some sense?
Well, I really think it does. It's a little counterintuitive for me originally because, most of the wedges you buy in the stores are 35.5 inches, right?
Yes.
And my present wedges are like 36.2 if I'm being sort of anal about what the number is. Okay, it was the length of my pitching wedge. And again, back to, responsiveness, I was amazed when I was hitting bunker shots with those. I didn't feel like I was leaning over so much in things. I just felt like it was a more natural setup, than in the past, right?
That more natural setup leads to much more natural play. You can control where the ball is going to go, left or right, up or down. And one of the things that I always say, it doesn't matter which club we're fitting for. You have to be able to control that for up and down or left and right. So I think, Tony, your experiment here that we've talked about a little bit seems to be verifying what I think about when I talk about how to fit you into a properly fit club.
And I know you in the past have talked to me too that when somebody, you fit the players that are on the golf team, and if they're going to do things with you, that's the way you fit them too, isn't it? I mean, all of your players in Indiana are playing wedges that way, aren't they? Or probably some large group.
I'm looking at the number of players that I've fit over the course of probably the last 7 years, and we have the Indiana Open going on, and right now I have 7 of those players in the top 45 players. And remember, there are a lot of ties, but 7 players in the top 45 all playing well tells me that we've probably done something right.
Yeah. Well, let's step into another, so that's sort of the first concept a little bit, and that is, trying to, and it sort of helps you to get kind of, the more reps you get of the same feel, the easier it, assuming you're making a good swing, the more you can create good feels. But, this whole thing when I did this myself started with a question about spinner wedges, okay, and we hadn't talked about that on the forum for quite a while, so I started a question. But if you would, talk a little bit about what your concept is of spinner wedges, and I guess or spinner wedge shafts, and maybe bring in a little bit about the old rifle stuff about how people made them, and I don't even know how that got discovered.
What you're asking here is that we kind of jump into some shaft design parameters, or how we deal with shaft fitting for a lot of players, and this all kind of works the same way. There was originally we used a product called a rifle stepless steel shaft, and the way that shaft was designed was it had absolutely no steps in it, from the tip all the way to the butt. So it was like just one big shiny thing with no little bumps in the middle. And the only way that you could design or feel or make changes in that shaft was to use the original Brunswick frequency meter, because at the time that Rifle Precision was working, Brunswick actually owned the company. And so we used a frequency meter, and we measured frequencies of shafts from the butt end. But we also measured those shafts by weight, and we had categories of those shafts. And essentially what we did was we had a lot of blanks. Every one of the shafts were 41 inches long, and we would make, based on weight and frequency readings of what the shaft was, determinations of exactly where that flex point in that shaft would be. It's a little bit simpler when we have step shafts like Dynamic Gold, but what happened was we found that with the stepless shafts, you would build a set to what we would call like a 4.0 or a 4.5
or what? Yeah, right.
5.0 frequency reading, which didn't mean much to anything other than a flexural characteristic of the shaft to the club maker. And so the club makers are looking at this and they're thinking, well, we've reached this point. We know how all of these shafts work. And then we started looking at how do we control the ball flight, essentially how high the ball is going to go after impact and during the flight of the ball from impact to where it lands on the green. And we started saying, we really wanted to have a little bit more controlled flight of the ball. And the way that we found to do that was what we called a spinner shaft, which was if you played normally to a moment of inertia at a 4.0 or 4.5 flex, that you would probably need to have a little bit stiffer shaft, but with a little bit more control. So the way that we kind of went through the design process was we took a stiffer shaft or a heavier shaft, and we took essentially going up one flex and then bringing the feel of the shaft back to an 8-iron, and then putting that shaft in your wedges.
So tipping it like you would tip an 8-iron shaft in terms of how much you would cut off the tip end, right?
Essentially, that's what we did. And what we found was the shaft was a little bit heavier, the wedge head was a little bit heavier, the moment of inertia of the total club remained the same, but we were now able to kind of control how high the ball was going to fly as it approached the green and how it was going to either check up or roll out based on the type of shot that we made with that club. But the sense of feel that our players returned to us at that 8-iron flexural capacity in the shaft gave them a better sense of touch about what they were doing with that shot. So am I kind of describing what you experienced, Tony?
Oh, I think that's right. I think that was the immediate reaction I had with those. And as I said, I mean, if you look from a butt flex standpoint, that shaft is like at least one flex softer, right? And that's not the total characteristic of the shaft. There's much more than butt flex, but it's certainly, at least at that level, it plays softer, but the feel is very different.
And that's one of the things that when we go back to that discussion about myself and Terry Kaler wearing out a whole bunch of greens on somebody's golf course, is what we come down to. It's how do we teach our players and how do we make golf clubs for our players have that sense of feel that they can control that shot. And the control of the shot is what, as a club maker, we're really looking to do for our players. And I don't know, Tony, I hope I'm not stepping on toes, but I think that that's what we as club makers are supposed to be doing.
I hope so. We are. I know so, right? And in fact, I've been so surprised by this that I'm not sure. Well, let me go back. 6 or 7 years ago when I kind of started, right? Almost from the beginning, everybody that I saw that was talking about doing, how they're gonna build clubs they were always saying, when you get to the wedges, instead of trying to be on the same flex line, why don't you build them to like 9-iron flex, which is close to, it's not exactly the same as what you described, but it's similar to that. And I think that was trying to create that better, improved feel in the scoring clubs.
Well, Tony, you're actually correct. And if you look at a couple of the major manufacturers, specifically if we look at the True Temper program, True Temper stopped making what they called a wedge-specific shaft approximately 6 years ago. They used to make a shaft which was a constant weighted shaft, and it ran down to a length of 35 inches.
Okay.
And those were considered wedge shafts. They were considered a proprietary wedge shaft for the pitching wedge, the approach wedge, which wasn't used a lot, but the sand wedge was the additional wedge. And now we use the approach wedge, the sand wedge, and the lob wedge. So that 35-inch shaft was what they used. And what has happened, they would go beyond that and actually go down to a 34.5-inch shaft and allow you to use that for your sand wedges, which was even stiffer than a sand wedge.
Yeah.
So they essentially figured out that a lot of players and a lot of club makers are saying it doesn't need to be that stiff in a sand wedge. So they stopped, and now when you buy a set of shafts, remember all shafts are now called a dynamic gold long, which adds 2 inches to the butt section. So that 35-inch shaft is now measured at 37 inches.
Yeah.
So, but essentially when we build our sets of clubs, if we buy discrete shafts, which means that the shaft is designed for a 3-iron and designed for a 4-iron and a 5-iron, and as we go down through our set, they stop at the 9-iron now and do not build those discrete shafts for the pitching wedge, the sand wedge, and the lob wedge.
Although there are some that are doing that still, but not everybody.
There are still companies that do that, and there are still players in this world that need that. And there's never any, I guess there's no way for me to put a cut and dried. This is exactly the way you have to do it, kind of a build for a player. But I think at the same time, True Temper has said, we don't want our shafts to get any stiffer than this.
Yeah.
And essentially, what I'm saying is, you don't even have to get as stiff as you do. You could stop maybe an inch shorter, or maybe an inch softer, and make that a 38-inch iron, which is what an 8-iron would normally be.
The taper, which is based, like what an 8-iron is. That's right. Yeah, you had talked about that before.
As I'm discussing this, I always think in terms of constant weighted shafts. There are other shafts that we could use, which are non-constant weighted. What do we call them? Descending weight shafts. Because as we start cutting from the tip of the shaft, they start getting wider.
Yeah. Now
my concept is always the same.
Yeah. Now you made that. I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt, but you did mention. To be fair, I mean, not everybody has that same sense of feel too, right? Because some people may really like a really rebar-ish kind of feel in their wedges, but they at least deserve the chance to look at different options, right?
Oh yes, they do, and I've had a number of different players that play different that play them, and have different feels. For example, when I had Jeff Overton, he wanted the heaviest club that I could get in his hands, and Jeff has made, if I believe correctly, it's about 15 million so far on the PGA. So there's nothing wrong with his sense of feel. If his sense of feel relates to the amount of money that he's made on tour.
Yeah, he's doing pretty good, and he's probably experimented back and forth too with different options. But I think that's the big point. Just not assuming that because this is supposed to be a wedge shaft, maybe there's other ways to look at it. And as you said earlier, it's our job as club fitters to try to put different options in people's hands and find out which one they're more responsive to.
I think you're absolutely correct there, Tony. And we've even had companies like True Temper who created a product, I think about 8 years ago. They called it their version of a spinner shaft, a dynamic gold spinner. And they talked about the hinge in the shaft. And, unless you're a shaft designer, you won't talk about hinges. But basically, the hinge in the shaft is where that shaft wants to bend and flex and react in your hands. And that is all about feel that you as a player experience. So, I mean, does that hinge concept make some sense to you, Tony? Do I need to try and explain that more?
Well, go into it a little more, sure.
Okay.
You mean it's just how it's sort of related to the bend profile or something? Is that a little bit?
Kind of bend profile, and it's also a sense of where you feel the balance point of the shaft.
Okay.
And so when we talk about where that shaft wants to hinge, is where that shaft actually starts its flexural point from as you load it right before impact. And so that point, the hinge, tells us exactly where that shaft is starting to work. And that can be moved up and down the shaft when we talk about moment of inertia fitting. And as that hinge point moves up and down, we as players react to that point. That point tells us how we're going to actually have impact with the ball, whether we have a good impact or a bad impact with the ball.
So now some players too, I mentioned this to some other pros locally I talked to, and they said, I spin my wedges enough, so would I want to do anything like this? Maybe, maybe not. I suppose some of it also can depend, and I'm trying to give a balanced viewpoint on this too, a little bit on what their contact is, I guess, right? In terms of what the types of shafts that really make the sense to them. And
we have to also remember, when we talk about the moment of inertia or the amount of effort that it takes for our body to swing around and have good contact with the ball, there's a certain amount of weight that we can put in each individual's hand. And the weight that we put into a professional golfer's hands who has hit like 1 million golf balls on the range isn't going to be the same weight as my 93-year-old grandmother who wants to just go out and get a few golf balls. She's never going to hit that.
The same total weight. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, we have to think about how much weight that person can swing around their body. And so we have to kind of lighten that up sometimes and calculate what a person's capable of doing in the golf swing. And when we do that, and we think about how do we as players react to that, it always comes down to what our sense of feel is in our hands. Where our hands attached to the golf club in one place only, and that is all of the feedback that we get in our swing. And so our swing is designed about all of the feedback that comes back through our hands and our ability to maybe, swing around our body. So we may get some feedback from our shoulders, maybe even our big muscles like our quads and our glutes and our obliques. But at the same time, we still have all of those things, and we're trying to feel about how we want them to come around. And I say, if we use something like an 8-iron shaft instead of a wedge shaft, we're lightening that shaft up just a little bit, and we're being able to swing it around our body a little bit easier. And the length is going to be pretty much constant for all of our wedges, and I like that concept. Our hands are going to come back to the same place. We're going to be able to swing it a little bit easier, and it's going to play easier.
Well, my experiment so far, I think, is confirming that. What other things hadn't I touched that we had talked about? I think we're the truth is we've pretty much touched some of the things that I wanted to talk about.
We talked about a lot of things. We talked about the constant length, which is one of the things that I hack about a lot.
Yeah.
But it's more about having your hands come back to the same place and having your muscles learn to do the same thing every time you make a shot. And when I talk about the wedge, I don't talk about wedges per se. I talk about scoring clubs. And those are the clubs that get you the closest to the flagstick when you're hitting a golf ball.
And so that can include 9 irons. Well, for most of us mortals, right? Somewhere in the range of 9 irons and above. Yeah.
I think that's it. And when we look at in the research that's been done, we can go back to the mid 1900s where Cochran and Stobbs looked at this entire thing and basically gave us an analysis of everything that we need to do to have better play from a 5-iron all the way in and have much more accurate shot making and getting to the middle of the green or close to the flagstick is what we're talking about. And when it comes to 9 irons and 8 irons, and for me, the 8 irons all the way down to the lob wedges, I call them scoring clubs, and I put them all in the same category.
Yeah. So maybe somebody's going to put the 8-iron shaft in his 9-iron too. Who knows? It's fun to do a little experiment once in a while like this on yourself, though, Dave. Most times I don't, at least personally, take the time to do that because I'm so busy doing the other things I'm doing in my business. But this was a good treat for me.
I think it's a great treat, Tony, and at the same time, I will tell you, when I first got into the golf business, I did this because I was in a place when I was doing Race Across America at Huntington Beach. I went into a bike shop to get some stuff, and there's a big sign on the door that said, "It's a beautiful day. We went for a bike ride. We know you will understand. Please come back later." And I think, Tony, that we as club makers should have that same mindset. We should be able to go out and play golf and understand and experience what it is that we're doing to try and help other people play better.
Yeah, if we're not playing some ourselves, and I'm about to do some other little experiments with maybe the driver that'll just to see what happens, but it's a topic for another time. So kind of final words on this discussion on wedges and wedge shafts, and any other things that you want folks to remember here at the end, Dave.
Well, I think when it comes to your wedge play, a lot of people tell me, well, and you have to like what you see when you're looking down at the golf club. So when we talk about your wedge heads, there are a number of things to remember. I remember that as a player for the Razor Golf Company, which doesn't do a lot of stuff right now. But I worked on staff with Tommy Bolt and Jan Stevenson, and the clubs I thought were just absolutely marvelous. But I went out and played in the Florida sunshine with their wedges that were solid chrome. And the mirror effect of the chrome came up, and I literally could not see my impact with the ball because of the chrome. So I think when we talk about wedge fitting, we need to think in terms of the kind of conditions that you're going to be playing in, and the type of thing that you need to have looking back at you from the end of the club. So sometimes it's not always that bright chrome, but maybe a soft nickel finish or a black steel finish or even a rusty finish so that you don't get that blinding effect. And I think that's a really important part of what has to happen with your golf clubs.
It's how they look to you. To make sure you love them, right?
Absolutely. This is golf clubs and you are a love affair.
Golf is a love affair too, but
yes,
that's right. Well, Dave, thanks.
Tony, I think that we've covered a lot of stuff here. I'm always interested in hearing how your experiment's going, and I want to hear more about it. I really want to know, as you go on with this, especially with these single-length wedges, how they work into your play. And even if, because I had a discussion with a player out in Alberta, Canada, last week who said, I really like my 36-inch wedges, but I also like all of my longer irons, like my 4, 5, and 6, to be like about a 37-inch club. And I said, I don't see a problem with you playing single-length long irons at 37 and single-length short irons at 36.
Yeah.
Because I think you'll play very well with them.
Well, that's back to some of the other stuff with the Sterlings and all that kind of stuff, but yeah.
And these are the things that are being talked about in the industry today, single-length clubs. And I'm a firm believer, especially with scoring clubs, that single-length is a wonderful concept.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you introducing me to that and also talking to everybody today to tell them about it. So, Dave, we'll finish for now, but kind of hang in for a minute because I'm going to talk with you after we end. But I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. Thanks.
Tony, one last thing before we finish up. I've got to put in a plug for my opportunity to be able to teach this coming fall at the Roundtable 11, I believe, at the Association of Golf Club Fitting Professionals. And if you want to come and see me, if you've heard these podcasts and want to spend a week with me of instruction and having fun, I got to ask you to show up.
Well, I'm going to put a plug about that too, and I hope a lot of our club fitting friends are listening. I've loved all the roundtables that we've had. I've been to 8 of them, but I'm sorry, the lineup that we have this year, in terms of the people that are talking and the amount of learning we're going to have, is way over the top. The things that you're going to talk about, that Dana's going to talk about, and all the other folks, Dana on driver optimization and things. We're going to have a really good time. So, you folks out there who are on the fence about coming to this, you're going to really miss something if you decide not to. You should be there. There you go. I agree with you, Dave. Thanks for saying that.
Well, Tony, thank you very much for the opportunity, and to all the club makers and club fitters out there listening, a great shout out. Thank you very much for being with us in this podcast.
www.gameimprovementgolf.com.
Well, I appreciate Dave sharing his thoughts and insights on wedge setup and wedge shafts. Before I started putting together this podcast, all the pieces this morning, this is Monday morning, the word curious just jumped out to me. And for me, it's important to be curious about what I'm doing in terms of the golf clubs I make for people. And it's very important, I think, that I play once in a while because and to attempt different things with my own personal clubs and see what effect they have on my game and how the clubs perform. This was certainly the case in terms of the wedges that I just rebuilt for myself, and I learned something that I think is really helpful in terms of me helping golfers to play their best in the future. I know in every iron fitting that I'm going to do from now on, I'm going to at least strongly consider making the wedges the same length and using softer shafts in the wedges. And it's definitely an option that I want golfers to consider. And it was also unplanned that Dave was going to say something about the AGCP Roundtable at the end of the interview, but I'm glad he did. Those of you who are club fitters who are listening to this podcast, if you haven't signed up to go to this, you're really going to miss something. It's going to be a terrific event this time. They're all good, but the lineup of people who are going to present is phenomenal, and I've included a link to the schedule of events for the Roundtable in my show notes for the podcast. Well, that's it for today. In 2 weeks, I'll have the pleasure of talking with my partner at the Centennial Golf Academy, Des Mahoney, a PGA teaching professional. Over the last year or so, he started to do a lot of on-course coaching with his players, and in particular, working with them to improve their short game play. I'm looking forward to having him share his insights with you on what he has and is learning to help his golfers play their best. See you in 2 weeks.
Game Improvement Golf, your source of information and inspiration to become an exceptional golfer now. www.gameimprovementgolf.com